Another option when choosing a solution type is to build a software plus services application. This type of application leverages the power of the desktop in conjunction with Internet services, sometimes referred to as cloud services. Visual Studio 2008 uses ASP.NET Web Services or Windows Communication Foundation to build these types of applications. You can select Web, ASP.NET Web Service Application to build this application, or you can choose WCF Service Application. The difference between the two is that ASP.NET Web Service applications allow you to build simply a web service or a web method within your web service. Typically, the data in a web service is transported via HTTP in a firewall-friendly format. With WCF, your options are much more robust. Not only can WCF support a traditional web service, but it can also allow you to configure the endpoints to be a different type of application, such as binary transfer or transfer using a different port. WCF also adds instrumentation, security, and transaction reliability to a traditional web service. So when starting from scratch, to have the most power, choose WCF for your web service applications. But either way, should you choose a simple ASP.NET Web Service or a much more robust WCF service application, you'll be building applications that allow you to connect services to a desktop or web interface. The advantage of using services, such as web services, is that you can use ubiquitous technologies such as XML, HTTP, and TCP/IP. These standard-based protocols enable logic coded in one language to communicate across the web with other pieces of logic that may be coded in a different language. Because they communicate using standards, the choice of language, VB, .NET, Java, etc., serves as no barrier. This way, standard web services are consumable by heterogeneous environments. Be judicious when using web services, as they're serialized. This means on both sending and receiving points, the data is streamed in and out of text-based format. This takes a little bit of time on each endpoint, especially when you have a large amount of data. If you know that your endpoints don't require this serialization or a standard-based XML format isn't necessary for your application, then consider using binary transfer instead with technologies such as WCF or in the past, .NET remoting. A good indicator of when you should use web services is when you encounter the word cross-platform, cross-language, cross-firewall, crossing department barriers. If you need the logic and data to be accessible across a network in a standards-based way, such as transferring data as XML, then you should opt for a web services programming model, using either ASP.NET Web Service Application project template or the WCF Service Application template. Another best practice involves with consuming web services. For this, you could use traditional server-side logic in ASP.NET, or you can take advantage of the dual client and server-side programming model and look no further than ASP.NET AJAX. ASP.NET AJAX isn't just for building user interfaces. You can also use AJAX to call web services asynchronously. This is extremely powerful and should be used as much as possible. You've probably seen this in action when it comes to rating systems that a lot of websites use. Have you ever rated a book or a movie by clicking on a series of stars on a website and then realized that your changes were saved even though you didn't push a button to submit the page back to the web server? The page doesn't refresh, yet your data is still preserved. This is a classic example of using client-side calls to a web service. Because the call occurs asynchronously, behind the scenes, the user doesn't have to experience the page reloading and oftentimes losing their place. Here's another scenario. Let's say you want to populate a combo box without ever posting back to the server. We have a perfect example of this in the AJAX Control Toolkit. Open up the sample application either on your machine or from the website. Select the cascading drop-down option. This is a classic example of using asynchronous web service calls from the client. In this scenario, you get to choose from a series of drop-down boxes. Only the first one is enabled. Once you make a selection, in this case the make of a car, we'll select Audi, you'll see that the second option, Model, loads. This is actually making a remote call to a web service and bringing back data based on the make that you've selected. So in this case, I only see models belonging to the make Audi. If I had selected BMW, I would see different models loaded. For example, the 3 Series, the 5 Series, the 7 Series. Notice the behavior for the user. The user doesn't lose their place, the page isn't refreshed, and they can work simply from this area of the page without having to reload the entire page. And likewise, once I select a model, I can see only the colors that are attributed to that model. If I change the model, the colors will also change. All this is happening using asynchronous web services. Because this provides an optimal user experience, look to using ASP.NET AJAX when you're making asynchronous web service calls. Let's go back to Visual Studio.